Welcome everybody. Thank you, Ara, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for the third session. And so this original talk was scheduled to take place last year in 2020, but because of COVID we had to delay it until this year. So we're very pleased to welcome Ara to deliver this talk. And Ara's going to introduce himself. Just a couple of very small, short house rules. Please turn off your mobiles if you can for the next hour or so. Okay, so that's about it. And next week, I think we have Richard Anushian speaking. So please do come back again. And finally, before I forget, don't forget to complete the registration form if you haven't registered so far. And please, can you complete the feedback form? Those who are present, also those who are online, there is a Google form for you to complete as well, because we need those to demonstrate the value of these talks, which are supported by Ealing Council, and every year we have to demonstrate that there is an interest in this topic, and these topics, and therefore I have to provide a report to say how many people attended, what they thought about it, and so forth. So your feedback is really important, as is your registration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. So thank you, Eid, for a happy Eid to our Muslim listeners. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, Shen. I think it's a wonderful community resource. It's nice to see old friends. It's also missing friends as well, right? After so many years, people start dying, and that's part of the experience of being a community. So my name is Ara Sarafian. I'm a historian by training, and I'm the director of the Gomidas Institute, based in London, but we also work in the United States. One of the core areas of my own activity, the work that I do, has to do with the Armenian Genocide. I work on the Armenian Genocide at an academic level. I do documentary or documentation work, starting from the 1990s, when the genocide was denied vehemently by the Turkish government, and there was a need to create these published sources. I also work with Turkish civil society and Turkish academics. A lot of my work is aimed at Turkish audiences as much as Armenian ones, because the Armenian Genocide is part of our common experience, and Kurdish one I should say, common experience, and I'm personally committed to working towards a just resolution, truthful resolution of that. And I've been working inside Turkey since the 1990s, and very actively within Turkish civil society organizations from the early 2000s. And I'm an optimist. I actually do believe what we do matters, that it can serve positive ends, and that's what I do. So the Armenian Genocide has gone through lots of changes in the last 30, 35 years. Until the 1990s, when the Turkish state denied it, as I mentioned earlier, we relied for our information on foreign archives outside of Turkey. Diplomatic records, consular records, Germans, Americans, Austrians who were there, plus Armenian survivor accounts, the victims, what they had to say. And that was the basis of our critical understanding of 1915. The Turkish state, until that point, kept its own archives closed. Effectively, you could not study the subject in Turkey, in Turkish archives. In the 1990s, the Turkish government changed its tact. They said, we will open our archives, and you should only talk about so-called events of 1915 with reference to Turkish archival, Ottoman archival records in Turkey itself, and not to Americans or the British or even Armenians. The event happened there. We have the records. We will open them for our common for understanding. And of course, implicit in that was the assertion that what we already knew from all the other alternative sources somehow was irrelevant. This was a tactical move on the part of the Turkish state. But because of this change within Turkey, the records that they did open turned out to be invaluable. And I will go back to the Talaat Pasha. So how does this relate to our talk today? Well, Talaat Pasha was the Turkish Grand or Ottoman Grand Vizier in 1915. He is considered to be correctly one of the architects of the Armenian Genocide. We knew about his involvement with the Armenian Genocide, not by implication, because massacres happened and he was at the head of the Ministry of Interior, but because of the conversations he had with foreign dignitaries and when they discussed the Armenian issue. But it wasn't until 1990s that we got insights into how involved Talaat Pasha was in the mass annihilation of Armenians. Because with the opening of Ottoman archival records, for the first time we could see Talaat Pasha's own records, Talaat Pasha's own telegrams, orders, ordering deportations of Armenians from different parts of the Ottoman Empire, his supervision of the so-called deportation process. Right? He did not only order these deportations, he actually asked questions about the various caravans that were in the process of being deported. How many of the Erzurum Armenian caravan have reached Harpe, Elazığ area? Right? How many of this caravan have reached such and such point? And there were also surveys done. So during the genocide, the Ottoman state was actually counting its own victims. They were using the Ottoman bureaucracy and the telegraphic system to communicate with the provinces, giving instructions, getting information back, even doing surveys, updating or analyzing, coming to grips with where the genocidal process had got to. So it was a real eye-opener. It's almost as if Talaat Pasha had a large map in front of him, and in a sense, real time, in inverted commas, he was ordering the whole deportation process to go forward. Now we know deportations were not simply about orders, this and the other, that the actual killing part was also organized by the state. From the information that we have, these were extra-legal killing units. They were not necessarily ordered by the Ottoman bureaucracy, they had a parallel structure of communication. But Talaat Pasha was involved certainly at a civil level in making the whole deportation process and the destruction. So Talaat Pasha was clearly in the process. When the Ottoman state, the Turkish government opened Ottoman records, one thing became abundantly clear, that the information that they released was not across the spectrum. Only certain types of information was made available. Deportation orders were made available. Talaat Pasha asking questions about deportee caravans was made available. And the argument was that, look, these are orderly deportations, the state took care of them, the state ordered the process. What we did not find, and we still don't have, are the responses to those critical telegrams. When Talaat Pasha asked how many of the Erzurum caravan got to Elazığ, Harpet area, the response is vital. It doesn't necessarily show that he was concerned about the well-being of deportees. He wanted to see, and this is my argument, he wanted to see the attrition rate. How many people did not arrive? Because from Armenian sources we know, and this would be a good point of comparison. So to Turkish colleagues who might be watching this, I would say, well, this is a good point of comparison. Armenian sources are saying the men are being killed in these caravans. Armenians and American missionaries, the American consul in Harpet is saying, the Erzurum caravan arrived, there are no men amongst them. They are in an atrocious position. Many of the surviving young women were taken away from these caravans by Ottomans themselves. So they're in the process of being abused. They're part of the genocidal process. So the response that Talaat Pasha was asking for would be good and a fair point of comparison. Were these caravans well treated, and are Armenian sources and American sources in question, or is the opposite the case? And is that why these records have not been opened? And to this day, we don't have resettlement records. If you will argue that 800,000 Armenians or 600,000 Armenians were taken to Syria and Mesopotamia, and they were successfully resettled, as Turkish apologists will say happened, then there should be resettlement records. Where were they resettled? In what numbers? How were they fed? How did they reestablish themselves? These records are not available, have not been made available. And this gives you flavor of what has been opened and what has not been opened in Ottoman archives. Having said that, the information that is open is invaluable. There's a lot of material there that if you really sift through it, you can actually make exceptional use, but it's been sifted through. So my work started to engage these telegrams, this type of record, and by the early 2000s, when Turkish intellectuals themselves started studying the Armenian genocide in much more critical terms, because that's when the honeymoon under Erdogan, the issue was more open, we started making headway. So, 2005, a man called Murat Bardakçı, a conservative intellectual, but not necessarily part of the Turkish establishment, dropped a bombshell. I mean, that's it's the appropriate word. He said, I have Talaat Pasha's, some of his personal records. So, Talaat Pasha's private records, some of that material was given to him by Talaat Pasha's widow. So that means that this material was not sifted through the Ottoman archival process. It was not censored. And 2005, for the first time, he published those records. He published in the Hürriyet newspaper one critical set of records to do with the deportation of Armenians in 1915. Now, unfortunately, he just published the records, but not the facsimile. And already when you read the data that he presented, it was incredible. And 2 years later, he published the same information in a book format. The book format is important because in the book, on the left-hand side, are the facsimiles. So now, for the first time, he's revealing what he has from Talaat Pasha's private records to do with 1915. Murat Bardakçı himself argued that this actually does not show that there was an Armenian genocide. That I'm not going to go into what he has to say because it's irrelevant. Because I want to show what the material actually said. But I need my glasses. All right. So the Ottoman. The material. So he published Ottoman records. I don't know whether you can see. Right. Can I stand up? He published tables. Talaat Pasha had a demographic survey of some sort, because we don't know how it was obtained, but demographic records specifically on Armenians. So when Talaat Pasha fled from Ottoman Turkey, he took with him these little documents. I think it's almost like a criminal will take trophies. So he had relevant information on the deportation of Armenians in 1915 in a tabular format, where he identified region by region, and he said how many Armenians were found in that area, where they came from. And this information, so for example, I'll look at Latinized. Armenians in Syria, and it says, in Syria there were Local Armenians, 0. There were no Armenians who were living there when the survey was done, this information was collected. But outside Armenians, Yabancı Armenians, it shows that there were 39,000 Armenians, 409 Armenians, in Syria when the survey was done. And it shows you where these people came from. So it says 11,273 are from Adana, 16,101 are Haleb, 21 from Aydin, 761 from Erzurum. It's a detailed account of the Armenians who could be found in Syria. And this survey was done, was collected, and it was handwritten for Talaat Pasha for his own use, right? For his own use, an entire report on surviving Armenians. Now, I can tell you, this information came from a survey that he did, because I found the relevant records in Ottoman archives. In February 1917, Talaat Pasha ordered a survey to his bureaucrats. And he sent this survey to all provinces except in the east, and I think the reason is because there were no Armenians supposed to be there, so to the provinces. And he asked two very simple questions. How many Armenians are there in your province? How many of them are local? And how many of them are outsiders? Those who are outsiders, where are they from? It sounds like a very innocuous survey, very interesting survey. Why would he ask those questions? Right. So how many local Yerli Armenians and how many outsiders? Yabancı. Then he got the responses. The reason I'm giving the Syrian example to you now, from Talaat Pasha's own report, is because in the archives in Turkey, you can find a response from Syria. From Syria, Cemal Pasha's area, these are the figures that were sent to Constantinople. So the figures that you have much more detail are the ones that went into the report. The argument being is that the report that Talaat Pasha was holding in his hand was a product at the apex of the Ottoman bureaucracy. The Sadrazam, the Grand Vizier, wants to know, and they are using the best records that are available in order to answer his questions. And it's based on this survey. So the data that was published by Murat Bardakçı, we can verify and we can stress its critical importance that this is what the Ottoman bureaucracy believed to be the case. So they collected this information, and this is the survey from Syria, direct from the archival record. And I also added Deir Zor. Deir Zor is supposed to be the epicenter, the core settlement area where supposedly the deported Armenians were sent, right? And according to the survey in Talaat Pasha's personal booklet that was drawn up for him by his bureaucrats, by Ottoman bureaucrats, in Deir Zor, according to the survey, there were a total of 1,771 Armenians. So according to Ottoman record, in a province where supposedly 400,000 to 500,000 Armenians were sent in the previous 2 years, Ottoman bureaucracy counted 1,771 Armenians. This is a bombshell, all right? It completely undermines the whole architecture of the denialist archives who've taken this type of information out. So I just gave you the Syria example of the original document. You will not find the original document. I did not find the original document for Deir Zor. I believe the archives did not declassify that because they could see what it's saying, its significance. But because we have another copy of the whole survey in Talaat Pasha's private archives, we can have an idea of what the missing information is telling us. In fact, if you look at the Deir Zor data, it was actually modified in its final format with a footnote saying, we think these numbers are in error, and they upped it to like 7,000. So this data not only comes from an official survey, but it's been examined by Ottoman bureaucrats for accuracy and even change. So as far as the state was concerned, those Armenians who were deported there, supposedly resettled, they knew, Talaat Pasha knew that they were no longer there, right? This is a smoking gun, but that's not the biggest one. So when you look at Talaat Pasha's material, just for effect, this is a smoking gun. It's a very innocuous looking page, right? It's some data and figures. What does a smoking gun look like? So you look at the data. I've Latinized it. And the data, for Talaat Pasha's own eyes, this is obviously what he asked his bureaucrats to produce. This is the data it gives you, based on that survey. Ankara, Moscow, Nigde, Izmit, Kütahya, Eskişehir, the provinces are there. First one, native Armenians in province. How many Armenians are left when this was done, 1917, in Ankara? 12,766. How many Armenians from Ankara are in other provinces in 1917? 410. So that means that there are about, the state could count about 13,000 Armenians in Ankara, right? And how many other Armenians are there in Ankara who are not from Ankara? So as far as Ankara is concerned, there's about 13,000 Armenians counted. And then there's another column here. Why would they add this column? The column says how many Armenians were in Ankara in 1914, according to official figures. That means that this is an account of the Armenian Genocide, because this tells you there were 44,000 Armenians from Ankara in 1914, 44,000. In 1917, the government's counting 13,000. What does that tell you? And right across, it's a good one. I'm a Kayseri, talking to my aunt earlier. 47, according to official figures, about 48,000 Armenians in 1914. How many people are they counting Kayseri Armenians in Kayseri or the other areas? Answer: 6,650 in Kayseri and 111 according to this figure outside. That means that according to this, 40,000 Armenians in Kayseri cannot be counted for, according to the Ottoman survey. This tabular form tells Talaat Pasha, in a sense, the official view of what had happened to Armenians. Armenians have disappeared. All right? This is the closest I think you get to a report on the Armenian Genocide. So what I did, another point, important. In Ottoman historiography, deniers will say there were no more than about 1 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. For Talaat Pasha, his bureaucrats are telling him, actually, the number of Armenians is an undercount. It has to be increased by a factor of 30%. And according to the Ottoman bureaucrats, there were around 1.5 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. And when you look at this data, there are missing Armenians, Armenian Catholics, Armenian Protestants, and even some areas like Samsun is missing there. So this in some ways is much closer to what we believe is the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire. So this data that was released by Murat Bardakçı, which was not censored by the Ottoman archives themselves, is incongruous with everything else. And it's important data because of its authority. It was produced by the Ottoman bureaucrats for the Grand Vizier himself. Now, Talaat Pasha was assassinated 100 years ago, and probably because of that assassination, maybe this is one of the greatest legacies of Tellerian's murder of Talaat Pasha, because he never had a chance of destroying this information. This information sat in with the family, and it was released to Bardakçı, and today it's a pivotal reference point related to Talaat Pasha's knowledge of the Armenian Genocide. So what I did was I put all that data into an Excel program, and I generated, this is what the Armenian Genocide is according to Talaat Pasha. Each circle represents the size of Armenian communities according to the 1914 census. The black areas show the number of Armenians from these areas who could not be accounted for in 1917. If you look at this, 82%, 841,000 Armenians could not be counted for. Add that 30% to that because these are undercounts. It comes to close to 2.2 million, 1.2 million. 1.2 million Armenians could not be accounted for. They disappeared according to Ottoman records. And you look at regionally, these are the eastern provinces where the genocide was the worst, but even places like Izmit and Bursa and Eskişehir, more than 75% of Armenians from these areas went missing. These are entirely Ottoman records. This is Talaat Pasha's personal records, and this is why it's relevant to Turkish audiences. This is not based on foreign archives, Armenian sources. This is entirely based on Ottoman records. All right? And these yellow areas are Armenian populations that don't even figure into the calculation. They're not part of the data that's being used. So the numbers are even larger. So is this a smoking gun? It certainly is the basis of critical discussion. So when I published this, Murat Bardakci got upset. He criticized me without having read it. So we published a Turkish version of this too. And we released it in Turkey. We said we should have this discussion. Everything I'm saying now, I should say in front of Turkish audiences if we believe in critical dialogue. And let's discuss this. And when I published this is a English version. It's on the website, English and Turkish. I called it a study. So this is the basis of discussion. I'm not saying I'm right. All right? Let's discuss it. Do you contest the authenticity of the information? Do you contest the interpretation of the documentation? And if the answer is no and no, then we have to reconfigure our common understanding of 1915 based on one of the most important sources, the Grand Vizier's own personal records. Murat Bardakci says that, by the way, these missing Armenians, this is where you realize, he's a strange person in a good way. In many ways he's honest. Some of the things he said a few weeks ago on Turkish television I thought was amazing. But on this issue he'll say, all these missing Armenians, he said, emigrated or fled the Ottoman Empire between 1914 and 1917. It is such a bizarre thing for him to say that somebody living in Bursa or Izmit would be able to escape to the Russians, right? I mean, right across the Ottoman Empire, or emigrate secretly. It's a very bizarre thing to say. But that's fine. This is why I like to have this discussion with Murat Bardakci as well. But that's what he says. And his argument is that the fact that some Armenians survive is the antithesis of the Armenian Genocide, because according to Talaat Pasha's records, 204,000 Armenians survived in the interior Ottoman Empire. Okay, of these Armenians, 97,000 were in their own provinces, and 106,000 were in other provinces. So in 1917, this is the distribution of surviving Armenians. This is Deir Zor, by the way, which is the epicenter of where hundreds of thousands were sent. Even this can be contested, because if you look at Armenian sources, many Armenians who were left behind did not stay in their homes, did not continue going to school or their churches. They were still distributed amongst Muslim villages. Many were forced into marriages. One can interpret this saying, these are the Armenians who were slated for assimilation, which we read about in the memoir literature. So Kayseri, for example, earlier, was one prime example, and we know about it because they're American missionaries. Many Armenian women were required to marry Muslim men in order to stay alive, not to be deported. You find the same. We're about to publish a memoir on Palu area, one village of Til. Same thing happened in a very specific village. So the memoir literature is telling you yes, there were Armenians left behind, but even they were not free. Right? Even they were part of the process of forced assimilation, and under the auspices of the state knew where they were. They were counting their victims, they were counting their dead victims, they were also counting and managing the live ones as well. So this shows the power of the Ottoman state in regulating the deportation process year after year after year, and at the top of it, of course, it was Talaat Pasha himself. So Murat Bardakci did a great favor for us by not giving these records to the Ottoman archives. I'm sure they would not have declassified it, but putting this out there, because this is the key to future debates. The Turkish state even today says we need historians to work on 1915. Well, yes, historians are already working, but if we were to engage the official Turkey, say, well, all right, show us the Derzor records, show us resettlement records. I mean, one can create conditions under which we can go forward together, and it doesn't have to be statist. Armenia doesn't have to get involved. It's enough for half a dozen historians with the backing of the Turkish state in order to set the research agenda. Clearly, the Ottoman archives today are compromised in the way they've been declassified. Again, I won't put them down because they're very important. But we can actually engage the Turkish state instead of walking away. There's no way we will engage you on these issues because you are deniers. One can do the opposite. You can say, under these circumstances, we want these particular records. So every Armenian community that was deported in 1915 had to be registered. Their properties had to be registered. Right? So the state, this is a level at which they were operating. Those records are not open. Every family had to be registered before deportation. Remember, the Ottoman bureaucracy had control of these people. In the case of Harput, the locals describe how they were deported by region within a town itself. There are certain people who were left out, given exemptions. It shows you how much power the state had in regulating the genocidal process. And this is why I call this the first modern genocide. Modern in the sense of the use of bureaucracy in weeding out your victims, in corralling them into so-called deportation, into the extermination process, and then handing them over to the murderers. All right? And that part has not, of course, it's not being recorded, and we have the voices of the victims, and of course the missing populations. So there's a lot of good material, Ottoman material we can work with, and if you look at what we have, the Ottoman records that exist today only give details that we already knew about the extermination process. When Talaat Pasha, when Murat Bardakshi published Murat Bardakshi published what I've spoken so far in Hürriyet newspaper, without the facsimiles, and then once the facsimiles were given, of course we did this analysis. When he published his book, but he included a second set of documents, which I think is equally important. This is even more impressive because it's colored, it's got pie charts in it, and it's really tailor-made for Talaat Pasha's eyes. And the book, this document, again, there's no date on it, there's no title to it. But this document is comprised of two parts. And I think the way it's put together, the question it addresses suggests that it's a context in which the Armenian genocide takes place. It has two parts. The first part is entirely about the settlement of Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. Starting from the Russo-Turkish War 1877-78, Muslim immigrants, where have they come from? Where have they been settled? In many Western provinces, he's obsessed about the Balkan Muslims, where they've been settled in the Ottoman Empire. They're Muslims coming after the Balkan Wars and their settlement in the Ottoman Empire. Details about Ottoman officials and Ottoman military families settled in the Ottoman Empire. People who are able to and can be counted on immigrating into the Ottoman Empire from Greece. It's a very interesting collection of themes. The first part is almost like a ledger, the plus side, and the expense of these looking after these people, how much land these people have been given, how much orchards, gardens, and so on and so forth, in hundreds of millions of kurush. It's a detailed account. And then there's a second part to this ledger. In the second part, it's about the liquidation of Christian communities. It's about the exodus of, what's that one, small one, exodus of Bulgarians and the properties they left behind. It's about the exodus of Greeks as either immigrants or fugitives leaving the Ottoman Empire, and how much properties they left behind in terms of land, buildings, and what have you. It's a ledger of liquidation of entire communities, and of course the Armenians. It's a calculation of what happened to Armenians. The only thing that he seems to care about in this report, when it comes to Muslims, it's about their resettlement. Where did they settle? How were they fed? How were they compensated and set up? In the case of Armenians, is deported Armenians. Where were they deported from? And there is no account of where were they actually resettled in the end. It's like he doesn't care where these people went to. What he cared was how many Armenians left a particular area, and interestingly, where were they sent? So this is important because it shows you the classic area with the Der Zor in the center, right? The taboo subject. Der Zor is right in the middle. So in graphic terms, they're showing Talaat Pasha where these supposed Armenians went to, with no details. And then you have information like abandoned Armenian homes, right? Region by region, in Edirne, Adana, Ankara, Hudavendigar, Diyarbakir, Sivas. So the state is calculating how much properties the Armenians have left behind. The figures don't really make sense, by the way, because obviously it's less than what it should be. Because if you look at the population and number of houses they left behind, some places had to have like 55, an average of 55 people per household. But it still shows you that the state is only interested in these minorities, in this other booklet, only as a source of income, liquidation, for the settlement, the first part of Muslim communities. And of course the Greeks the Greeks as well. I haven't done the analysis of them all. So these materials show how much control the Ottoman state had. I would argue this shows a context. We often say it's a Turkification. Was a driving ideological force behind the deportation, liquidation of Armenians. This is what this other report shows. You're liquidating the Christian communities and you are reconstituting the Muslim population in the areas that are supported by the state. And this will be the ideological context. So this is Murat, the smoking gun, as I was saying, coming from official Ottoman archives. They only corroborate what we know, but they also show the manner in which the existing Ottoman archives have been doctored. And the question that we would raise as a part of our own agenda would be, when will you, so if you want to go into the propaganda offensive, if you want serious debate at archival level with the Turkish state, you need to make the commitment of first doing a survey of the archives themselves. What do you actually have there? And making all the relevant materials available to us today. The reason when I started this talk, I'm optimistic about the future, is that because there are a lot of cards to play, and often the people you're dealing with, there are state intellectuals who deny the Armenian genocide, knowing full well what it is. But last week I watched an archival debate, a debate on Turkish television of YouTube with Murat Bardakçı and Fatih Altaylı, where they were discussing these records. And Murat Bardakçı was remarkably candid about some things he said. For example, he said, it's ludicrous, and it's important because it shows, just because he's denying, because he believes Armenians were resettled, doesn't mean you stop talking to him. Because he's openly saying, President Erdogan recently said, all archives should be open, and Armenians have not opened theirs. Of course, it's rubbish what he said, it's rhetorical, but that's what Bardakçı said. I said, how can you expect Armenians to open their archives when the event happened on these territories and we have all the relevant archival records? I'm giving Murat Bardakçı the credit for saying that. Or he admitted, he said, many records have been denied to researchers. By the way, that happened to me in the 1990s. I would ask for materials and I would be denied in the archives by various ways. He actually acknowledged it. For me, it's important. And he said that's not because of the state. He's like an apologist. He said it's because the officials in charge. kraldan daha kral. They're more, I guess, more Catholic than the Pope would be the equivalent. So they were being sort of too tight in the way they were interpreting the rules. It's not the state that were creating the problem, but it was just officials. But him being willing to concede when he should be conceding and not playing games, gives me hope as well. Let people deny the Armenian Genocide if they wish, as long as you're willing to come together and talk about it. If you're willing to come and stand up for what you believe, make the argument from an informed position, listen to what the other person is saying, and then see whether you can come to some sort of different understanding, either one of you or both of you. But the potential there of talking to even deniers is there to then. We've seen, of course, in the last 20 years that Turkey has changed. Within Turkey, partly because of better scholarship, more openness in the early 2000s, there's a good number of very good Turkish academics who talk about the Armenian Genocide, who study it, who write about it without reservation. Some of the best work is done by them, by the way. Not Armenian scholars, but by Turkish scholars. So there's a dynamic here. The Turkish state is panicking right now because of the United States recognition. They claim they're afraid because Armenians will want compensation, land, blah, blah, blah. This is one argument supposedly trying to rally support. President Erdogan has reiterated a more extreme denialist position, saying these events never happened, Armenians massacred Turks, blah, blah, blah. He needs to say that. We have to understand that. If you want to get elected today, whether you like it or not, you have to appeal to even to the fascist or semi-fascist vote. They're there. They've been brainwashed. They believe this stuff. He can't come clean. And there's an element of that. And there are Turkish scholars who are scholars in the true sense of the word, who are doing authentic work. And there are even deniers who can still be turned around through critical dialogue. And this is where I see this type of work going. It is important to do this. We should not walk away and say, well, we know it happened, and if you don't acknowledge it, then you're a denier. There's no point talking to you. Because in the final analysis, we have enough material to work with, and we have enough material to try and convince more and more Turks, more and more well-meaning Turks, to modify their position or even overturn it completely. So this is a process that's happening. I don't think that the government's recent hard line in reaction to the United States will prevail. It can't prevail because the genie is out of the box now. The question is, how well can we use the opportunities in continuing this critical dialogue, in talking to Turkish audiences, even to Turkish audiences that appear to be in a denialist school of historiography. Some deniers are worth engaging because you can turn them around. But ultimately, it's the Turkish public that matters. So the Armenian Genocide is still a live issue. We have material to work with, and we have Turkish materials to work with in order to convince a change within the ranks of Turkey itself. And I always stress this. This is why we need scholarship, and we need to support scholarship, because that's the only way forward. It's Turks themselves and Armenians themselves coming to a truthful path and willing to engage the legacy of the past based on actual records and not fabricated records or sort of gamesmanship within archives. And now is a critical time to continue that, because a lot of scholars are reluctant or becoming more and more reluctant to work within Turkey itself because of some of the negative noises that are coming from there. When I watched Bardakçı and Altaylı talk in what I consider relatively open terms on Turkish television, TKT, to me that was important, that there's still room within Turkey to have these discussions. I would like to make this presentation to a Turkish audience, which I did more than 10 years ago, and nobody came. They did not want to engage. We put this information on a website. It's freely available, but we haven't had serious engagement. Is to force that engagement. Let's look at these records. If I'm wrong, shoot me down, and I'll shut up. Right? That's the way forward for you if you believe in what you have to say. But if I'm right, give me some credit, and let's say, well, what are the appropriate changes that we need to bring? So, thank you.